Hey there, Josh here, founder of Grid.io. Over the last couple of years, I've helped a lot of teams get their Jira setups under control. And one thing I kept noticing is assets. Either nobody was using them or they were using them completely wrong. So I got tired of seeing this mess, and it was always scattered schemas, no automations, assets and data that are completely useless, teams that just weren't using assets at all. So from there, I started to build out a system, something repeatable, a simple framework that actually works. And this course is me handing you those on a platter. All right, so what are assets and why should you care? So I like to think of assets as an open database, or maybe something a little bit less technical, like an Excel spreadsheet on steroids. We could store all of our assets and data inside of this database and then create relationships between those assets. But where the real magic happens is linking those assets to Jira directly. So let's use an IT team as an example. IT teams typically receive requests, either an incident or a service request from end users. Now, when a request is submitted, we can automatically look up who submitted this request and what hardware they're using inside of our asset schema, and link that directly to the ticket as soon as it's created. So as soon as a ticket is created, the tech can jump in and see exactly which laptop is being used. Now, this applies to a lot of other things as well. For example, software, other hardware like peripherals, permissions and policies, and a whole lot more. So an IT team is just a really basic example that I like to bring up, but there's definitely a lot more use cases for assets and relating them to Jira, which we'll cover in this course. All right, so let's jump in and create our first asset. So in order to find your assets, if you have the new UI, you'll have the assets button on the very left side here. If you're on the old UI, which you're probably not by the time you're watching this, it might be at the top, there might be a top bar, and it might be hidden under a more panel, but it's either gonna be at the top somewhere or on the left side as you see here. So I'll click on that, and this will take me to the home page of my assets. So if I ever wanna go home, or if I'm lost in some kind of an object or object schema, all I have to do is click this button on the top right, and I'm brought to the very home page with all of my object schemas. So to create our first asset, I'll jump into a schema, and we have what are object types and objects. I'll click on the blue create button at the top, and we'll be creating our first asset, which in this case is an office. So this is gonna be a location of an office, so I'll type in something along the lines of Seattle. I don't know if I have one of these already, but I'll create Seattle, and then we can enter an address, date incorporated, employees, if we'd like, and then we could click create. All those are optional except for the name, so I'm just gonna fill out the name for this example. I'll create this, and it looks like we already did have a Seattle, so we did create a duplicate, but that is how we create our very first object inside of our asset schema. All right, so what is an object schema? So an object schema is essentially a collection of different object types and objects. We'll go over exactly what those are later in the course, but for now, all you need to know is that objects flow into object types, which then flow into your your asset schemas. So your asset schemas are kind of like folders or different groups for all of your object types and categorization for everything that you're storing. So if you look at the asset schema that we have here, we have different groups, things like facilities, IT employee assets, people, a whole bunch other. But if I jump into one of these like facilities, all of these are going to be related to locations. So we won't be adding things like users here or IT hardware because we're only focusing on facilities. So as I said, it's pretty much a group or a way to store or kind of like a folder of all of your assets that you can bundle into one place. So how do we actually create one of these? So on the top right here, we have a create schema button. We could click on that. And then we have a couple of templates here, which I recommend using these templates if you're just starting out. Create one of these templates, jump around, use some of these asset schemas to get familiar with it. But if you're starting with something that you're already familiar with, or you're building out a very specific schema, or your template's not here, we're gonna go ahead and create a blank one. So when you click that, you'll enter in a schema name. So I'll name this test 2 just for the demo. We'll give it a key. I think that one's already taken, so I'll do test 2. And then we could add a description, which is optional, so I'll leave that blank for now. And then we create our schema. So now we have a brand new schema. If I go back to our home page, we have the test 2 and the test schema. I think it was this one that I created, and it's completely blank, and we'll start to jump in and create all of our objects and object types later inside of this course. All right, so before we jump into creating our objects and object types, let's go over some of the schemas that we can create and some of the most common things that I've seen clients do and use assets for. So a lot of those things are listed here, things like application portfolios where you could store all of your software, link those to individual permissions and users. That's a very common use case. Customer support, this is kind of an expansion or something a little bit more robust than the customer and organization tracking out of Jira Service Management. A lot of customers or clients that I've worked with use this when the native features for the customers and organizations are somewhat lacking for their needs. Engineering support, this is a group of teams and users, so this is very common to be able to link different groups or teams to individual Jira tickets. Then we have things like facilities, which we already covered a little bit of, but that's just going to be your locations. You have IT employee assets, and I mentioned this one a lot, but it's things like IT hardware, your laptops, phones, monitors, and a whole lot of other things that you could track from your IT team. We have people, so you could also sync this with Azure AD as well as Intune for your IT assets, but you could sync all of your Google Workspace individuals, your Azure individuals into the asset schema. That way you can automatically have them imported here and synced anytime you create users there. That does tend to be very common. Sometimes they're managed in here alone without any integration, but I've seen for the most part our clients using a sync between some kind of third-party platform. Practice standards, so anything related to policies and permissions can be stored here and then related to those users. I'll skip over services for now, but a lot of other things that I've seen have been even physical asset tracking, like shipping different assets from jobs to sites to a lot of other things. Now services, this one, it does dive into a lot more on-prem and service-related infrastructure that you might have within your organization. Could be cloud as well, but the idea here is that you could store all of your services that you're hosting and that you're providing for your clients. And then you have all of your infrastructure inside of your asset schema. And then all of that supports a service, like a business service or an application. And then as soon as a server goes down or a cloud infrastructure goes down, you see exactly which service that affects. So you could use this with change management if you need to upgrade or change servers. If you have outages, you know exactly which servers are going to affect which applications and a whole lot more. So this does go super in depth, and I've worked on a few of these implementations for a few different clients in the past. And it does go very in depth, but if you have some kind of services or applications, this is a great way to be able to store them and be able to submit change requests through Jira or incidents through Jira and see which services are affected. So the last thing to note about object schemas is that each one has its own settings. To find those settings, you could open up your schemas and then click on the three dots on the right side and click on settings. This will bring you to a screen that looks like this. And let's just really quickly dive into what exactly these settings are and what changes you can make. So there's some general info about this schema at the very top here. You can't change most of this other than name and description. The rest of these are just pulling information from what's currently in your schema. There's a few additional settings down here. I would tend not to change any of these unless you're limiting directly the types of relationships your objects want to create. I've never had a need to change any of these. So again, unless you're trying to limit if objects can create relationships with the schema, I would leave these all checked. You could also delete your schema down here. Definitely don't do that unless you're 100% sure you want to remove and lose all of your data associated with the schema and never get it back. The second tab is reference types. So reference types allow you to create the relationships between objects. And what's really great about the way that Jira does this is that it actually allows you to create custom reference types. So there's a few out of box that you can see here. We have different colors to associate those reference types, and we'll go over those in depth later. But we could create a new reference type for this schema, name it whatever we'd like, give it a description, a color, and then we could use that reference type when relating new objects. The last thing that I'll cover in this video, we'll be covering roles and permissions in a later video in this course, same thing with importing. But the last thing is going to be your statuses. So out of box, you'll have a certain number or a certain set of statuses that Jira gives you, like active, running, decommissioned. I don't remember exactly what that list was, but if you wanted to add custom statuses that you could use with an attribute or field within your object types, you can do that here. So that's a quick overview of the settings that we have for these schemas. We'll dive into the objects next. There are two places that we could set roles and permissions within our assets. The first is going to be on a schema level, and the second is going to be on an object type level. To get to our object type permissions, we go into a schema, we go to our object type list, click the three dots, go to object type settings, and in here there's going to be a tab for roles. I'm going to skip over this because we have all the same options in our schema, and it's going to be a little bit redundant to go over all of them. Back to our schema list, we'll go ahead and open up our facility schema as we were looking at earlier, and we'll go into these settings. In here, we're going to have our roles tab, and we have a few different roles that are essentially created by Atlassian for us to assign either to a group, to a user, or to an app. So apps are typically going to request these when you install them, so no need to look at those unless they're specifically requesting them. But for the rest of these, you can click on this button here, and that will take you to a page that looks like this. So we have a couple of different options. Object Viewer, which is exactly what it sounds. It lets you pretty much just read and view different objects within that space. Users, developers, managers, and Jira admins. Jira admins aren't included in that list because those are org admins or site admins, which by default have permissions to view all of your entire asset schema. So you have your users, developers, and managers, and you could go through this list to see what each of those does. I won't go into each and every one of these options, but you could go through and find out which particular role you need to assign to a particular individual or group. Once you figured that out, all you have to do is go into your roles and start assigning users or groups, and you'll have some out of box that are already assigned to most of the schemas that you have. But if you wanted to start tweaking these manually and adding things like users, developers, managers, and viewers, you could go through and add them here. The only thing that I'm going to mention here for kind of setting this up in the best way is to definitely use groups as much as you can. So if you have a group of users or a particular permission set, or maybe for particular departments, and you're grouping those users in there, definitely use groups rather than users. Use users only when you have to, or if those particular users aren't a part of a group. Otherwise, you'll end up having to control and micromanage each of the permissions of each user, which gets very, very tiring for your Jira admin, or for you if you're the Jira admin. So definitely use groups when you can, and sync those from AD if you can as well, or Google Workspace. That way they're managed outside of Jira, and you just bring them in and assign the roles here. If you're using Jira Assets and you're confused about objects, fields, and views, let's break down exactly how those work. All right, so now we get to jump in and have some fun with our objects. So I'll pull up my IT Asset Schema as an example, and on the very left side here, I'll collapse this to make it a little bit simpler. We have what are called object types. And these are stored in what is called a schema tree. So you could call these the schema tree or an object type, which is what I like to use. Object type is also the term used in AQL, which we'll cover a little bit later. So on the left, we have our object types, and inside of each object type, we have our individual objects. So if I use the IT hardware and I open that up, we have nested object types under that. For example, IT hardware laptops. So our object type for laptop now has one object, which is just one laptop. So to recap our hierarchy that we have within our asset schema, is we have the asset schema first, then we have each object type, and then under that we have each individual object. So it's very simple, and we do have those nested object types, and we could stack those and nest those however we'd like. Some schemas do have that, some schemas don't have that. If I pull up my test schema, we have no nested objects, so it's totally up to you how you want to organize and create these object types for yourself. So diving into the schema and then these object types, we can create our objects by clicking the create button at the top. So we could go here, we could create a new office as we have already covered. We could also create a new object type by clicking this plus button on the left side. So we could click this, that'll bring us to the create item for object types. We could give it whatever name we'd like. So I'll call this, not test, let's go ahead and use something along the lines of state. So maybe we have different states that we have offices in within the US, and maybe I'll use a different icon for that. Maybe something like this with little arrows. And this is where I could assign the parent if I'd like. I'll leave it blank, and I could create a description if I'd want to associate this object type with a description, and I'll click create. So now we have a new object type for state. You can see that we don't have any objects in here because we didn't create any yet. It's a brand new object type. If we did want to create an object, we click on the create button here or here, and that'll bring us to this screen to create a new object. So attributes are missing, and we'll go on a deep dive into attributes for each object type and how to create those. But we can create attributes by going to this tab here and then adding a name, description, the type, and then clicking add. So one thing to note with the views for all of these objects, object types, is that you might be looking at something like this. This is the default view for as soon as you jump into Jira, and it is similar to what you have with your filter views where you have detailed view versus list view. I do prefer list view because you could see different columns and different values at a glance. So rather than seeing all the details and information about one asset, I could see some information about all assets or a lot more assets. So I do prefer this. Sometimes I do switch back and forth, but just one thing to note, if you do see a different view from mine, you can hit the list view to change what you're looking at. And that does change some of the buttons that you see here and moves them to the right side. Bulk action is really great to change a lot of different values at the same time within this list, but you could also export directly from here if you wanted to do that, or delete objects or print QR codes. When you're looking at the list view, you also have this columns button, so we could jump in and add whatever columns we'd like. That way we can see exactly which address is associated, for example, with which office. So if you did want to see more information on a list view like this is a really great way to do that. So just like our schemas, our object types also have their own settings. So let's dive into that and take a look at what the options are. To find your settings for the object type, you could hover over it, click on the three dots, and click on Object Settings. This brings you to a page that looks fairly similar to your schema settings, but very tailored and specific to your object types. So in here, you'll see the information for your schema. You could change the name, the icon, the description. This is also where you go to delete a schema. Again, keep in mind, if you do delete this, you'll never be able to recover it unless you have some kind of a backup. In here, we also have roles. So we can set roles and permissions for individual object types, which is really, really great. And we'll be covering this later in the course with a video specific to roles and permissions. Last thing is inheritance, and really the only thing to cover here is this setting here, which is to pass along attributes to objects or child objects, which essentially when you create a child object, or sorry, an object type, what it does is pulls over all the assets and information from the parent object type into the child one automatically. So if you did want that process to reflect, or those object types to reflect the parent one, you could check that box. If you wanted to set it up manually, you could leave this unchecked. Attributes is just a fancy name for fields. So let's jump in and go over each option that we have available to us. So if I'm looking at an object type and I have the list view open, on the top right, I'm going to see objects and attributes. I can switch between these two, and when I click on attributes, I see all of the attributes listed that we have available to us in this object type, and I could start creating new ones or modify existing ones if I'd like. We also see the same list of attributes when we click on an object or when we create a new object. The same exact list is going to show up here. So as you add more attributes, they're going to be showing up in those two places. So let's go over each option that we have. So we're going to have the default, which contains a list of default attributes that are kind of more standard, you can say. So we have things like text, integer, boolean, float, date time, URL, email, text area, select, and IP address. I'll go over a few of these that I tend to use the most, but definitely look into which ones might be best suited for you. I find myself that I use maybe half of these and the other half are a lot more rare. Then we have a few other options, which I'll get to in a second, but let's go ahead and start creating a few attributes that are going to be standard and used within pretty much every single schema. So we're looking at HVAC models, and we have things like manufacturer, serviceable, which is a status. So I'm going to add a text field, which may be model. So I'll pull up a model, and we select a default text. I won't add any more information like description. I'll leave things simple, and then I click add to add my first attribute. Let's keep going and go ahead and select default again. In this case, we'll select maybe date, and then we'll say install date. And this will tell us exactly which date the HVAC was installed on. So I'll go ahead and add that. Next, let's add maybe something like a URL. So maybe this is going to be, maybe we have a user manual and we're going to link a URL to that. So I'll go ahead and add that. Then let's see what else we have in here. Text area, so this might be something like description or something a little bit longer. Maybe this is going to be more details or more information about this particular HVAC unit. I'll just write details and move this up a little bit. That way we have it right underneath something like name, and we have it showing up towards the top of our object. So that's going to be most of our standard fields. Again, a lot of these can be useful depending on what you're doing. Those are the most common ones that I've used before. Text area, URL, date time sometimes, in text are the most common ones that I tend to use. Again, feel free to check the rest of these out if you're interested in using those. Let's dive into the rest of the types of attributes that we have. So object I'll touch on in the next video in this course. We'll do a deep dive into object relationships and the way that they work. But for now, let's skip that and go to user. So user is essentially going to allow us to pull from the list of users we have in our Atlassian users. So I'll select a couple of groups that we want to narrow this down to. And maybe I want to include a few here. I'll just pull in a few as a sample. And I'll name this, maybe I want to name the tech that's going to be installing this. So I'll add that field in. We also have group, which pulls from the Atlassian groups, very similar to users. We could just pull in group here. And there's nothing to select here because you're really just pulling the list of groups that you have in your Atlassian environment. So I'll add that. Then we have the projects, which pulls a list of your Jira projects if you wanted to do that within your asset schema. I'll show you what that looks like as well. And then we also have status. So status, we already have one of those types of fields here, which is serviceable status. I could add a secondary one if I'd like, and I'll actually just call this status and narrow it down to just a couple of options. So this is the full list. If we leave this blank, we'll have all of these available to us. But if you do want to narrow this down, you can click on whatever options you'd like to only show up when you're looking at this object type and selecting this attribute. So maybe active, and let's see if I could do inactive or maybe dead or something. So just two options here to keep things simple. The last one is Bitbucket repository. Pretty self-explanatory. You could link a repository to your asset schema. I don't have any created right now, so I won't add that as a sample, but you can link your repositories directly to your schema here. So I added all of those fields. Let's go ahead and jump back into our object and go over each of those that we just added. So at the top here, we have model. So this might be like 123, NXZ, whatever model you might call this. And then you edit your field, plain text. So you could add pretty much whatever you'd like here, whatever characters, click the check mark and you're done. Install date. So this will just be a simple date field. Maybe this was installed on Friday. Select that, click the check, and we're good. User manual, URL, you could paste the URL directly into here. So maybe I'll pull up my website, or grid.io, not .com. And I think it's going to need the HTTP. Yep, there we go. So https:// and then we have a valid link to add. There we go. Tech, again, pulling from our users, specific groups that we applied. I could search for different users. I'll search for myself. There I am. I'll select myself as the user. And now I'm filled out. Group, same thing here. We could pull in a group, kind of like what we saw when we were actually creating the tech attribute. So I'll pull in a random group here just to demo that. Projects, like I mentioned, list a list of projects from your Jira environment. Fairly straightforward. If you ever wanted to pull this list into a schema, you could do that using the projects field. And then status, as I mentioned, I only selected two. So now we only have these two options, active and dead. I'll select active to say that maybe this one is currently in the field and running. We could automate this to say dead sometime in the future, and we'll go over all those automations and how to do that a little bit later. But for now, I'll just leave it as active. So we now have our fields created. Let's say we want to go in and modify some of these fields, whether that's the name or the type of field. We go back to our attributes. And let's say I go to my statuses and I want to add more statuses that I can actually select within the dropdown. So I just click on the three dots and go to attribute settings. And I don't think I could actually edit. I think I can edit actually when I go here. So depending on what you're clicking on, you're going to be able to edit that field. The object or attribute settings are located here. But if you wanted to edit the name, you go click on the actual field. Or if you wanted to add more statuses, you click on the statuses here. And then I will select what's going to make sense here, powered off. So maybe it was powered off. I'll click on update. And I could also update the name and description. So status. Status, I don't know what to call this, maybe status 2. That way we have a secondary status field. Click update. All of our updates are made now. Go back to objects. Our status 2 field is updated. Click the drop down. We now have another option to add. But what if I wanted, say, 2 statuses, or what if I wanted 2 technicians or multiple groups? How do we adjust that within each of these fields? So when we add these fields, we are limited to some options that we see right up front. And if we want to add more options later, what we have to do is, let's say I'll find the tech field, and I'll go to attribute settings this time. So the 3 dots, attribute settings. And there's one setting here for unique, which essentially allows us to make this unique across your object types. And then there's cardinality. So this allows you to have a minimum and a maximum for this particular field. In this case, the maximum is 1. I could set this to 2 or more, or unlimited. So maybe I want to be able to add unlimited text here. I don't want to limit this type of field. I'll select that and I'll click update. Once that updates, I'll jump back into my objects. And now if I go to tech, you can see that I could X one user out and add another user if I wanted to. So let me see, Alana Grant. Now I could add 2. And there we go. We now have 2 users in the same field. So anytime you want to add multiple attributes or you want to change a field the way that it works, definitely look into the attributes and the settings that you have within the attribute settings. That's going to give you all of the options to change. And also depending on which attribute you select, as you can see here, you could have cardinality, general, and validation. So there's a regular expression that you could add here for date fields and other types of fields. When you go into object relationships, you'll also get a couple more options. So You can make include children. You can check include children here. You can make these unique. You could also filter different objects into here. So we'll be going over that in the next training video. Object references and relationships. So this is where assets start to get really powerful. We can start to link objects together, whether that's from the same schema or two entirely different objects from completely different schemas. We can link them together and create relationships between the two. We could visualize those relationships on the object graph and see how they interact with each other with multiple layers. And we could even run automations on those relationships a little bit later, which we'll cover in the training in a later module. So before I go in and start to create those attributes and fields, I want to show you exactly how to create references and why they matter. So these references are these little names that we have here with outbound and inbound references. So provided by and reference are both a link type. And to create those, we can either go to our object settings here, or we could go back to our very home page. And I was in the facility schema. So I'll click on the three dots and go to the settings button here. And both of those options will take you to the same place. We could click on reference types at the top. And these are the reference types that we have available to us in the facility schema. Now, if you did create a brand new schema like this one here, I'll show you what that's going to look like, because either is going to be completely empty or it might have a few out-of-box ones depending on whether or not you created a template and depending on what you have configured for your global settings. So it's going to most likely look like this for you. And to create a new reference, all you do is click this button and then you give this reference a name. So this could be a link or a relationship or whatever you want. Give it a description, give it a color, and this will help you identify the type of relationship and be able to see them a little bit better later when you actually create those links. All you do is create link, and this one is actually not unique, so I'll say link to an asset or maybe a facility or maybe something more specific, and then I'll create it. And now we have a new reference type that we can use later. So back to my facility schema. Let's pop open my HVAC models. Let me clean this up really quick. And let's say we already created all the reference types that we'd like, which we already have quite a bit within the schema. Now we have to go back to attributes, and instead of selecting one of the other options, we are going to select object. When we select object, we're going to be met with all of the object types that are in our schema, and we could go through and find the one that we'd like. So we could go through and let's say we want to pull in the offices. I could scroll through and find offices, and there it is. So this is going to be within the same schema, but you can see here that below this, we have a little header with different options. So this is going to be an entirely different schema. So that's our services schema, application portfolio, customer support. This is where we could create the relationships cross schemas instead of just within this one. For this demo, I'll just select offices since it's already here, and it's going to be a little bit easier to demo. So I'll click on that, and then we'll select the reference type, which is what we were just creating and looking at earlier. I'll keep it simple and just call it a link because we already have provided by, and I'll give this a name, office, keeping it very, very simple, and we'll add that. And now we have our object created, and we could go back to our object, our reference type created, could go back to our object, and when we click this drop down, we're met with all of these options, which are actually located in our office object type. So as soon as I add one here, I'll create a new object type for offices. Let's say test, this is new, just to make sure it's going to be completely unique and we know that we just created it. So I'll create that. Let's go back to HVAC. Let's go open up one of our objects. We'll click the office dropdown and let's see if we could find that new one. Test, this is new. There we go. So we're pulling a live update or live options that we have of the objects that we've created in our offices, and we can link them together. So once we've added that link, on the very top right, you can see that we created a new reference. This is going to be an outbound reference. So we have a link out to test, this is new. And now that this reference is created, I could jump into this object in an entirely different object schema. And this is going to be our inbound reference. So we're linking out from our previous object type, and then we're linking into this one. So we could go back and forth and just jump between the two to make things really easy. And now we have that link built from the HVAC model side. So it only needs the link from one side. You can add a field from the, so if I pull in this office here, we can add another link for our HVAC system from here, but it'll just create two references. So you don't necessarily want to do that. You definitely want to make sure that you're creating the right reference, whether it's inbound or outbound, and think through the way that you'll want to be selecting these and create it only once. Otherwise, you'll be duplicating your efforts. One other thing I'll mention here is that we can go into our settings for this particular field. So I'll go back to, let's go back to our facility schema, and we'll go into our attributes. And in here, when we actually create that object, we can go to our attribute settings and we could filter in specific objects. So this is great for if you want only a subsection of those particular objects that we're pulling in. So let's go back to our asset schema, or I should go back to offices. And in here, let's say that we only want to pull in the office that we just created, wherever that is. That's not it. Test this as new. Let's give this a very specific option with a drop down, if there is one, or maybe approver is Josh. And so now we're only going to be searching for something that has an approver of Josh. If it doesn't have that, it shouldn't show up in that filtered results. So let's go back to HVAC, go back to attribute, go back to filtering, and we will have a more advanced module on AQL on how to use this. You may already be familiar with JQL, in which case this is very similar to that, but we will be going over advanced AQL and tactics and how to use AQL in another module. So AQL, let's say approver, and we need the exact name actually, and I completely forgot what it was. So I'll just copy over the exact one from here, and we'll pull in that object, go to filters one more time, and filter or approvers equals, and we'll open a parentheses and just type in Josh. And once you have the check mark, that means you're good and your AQL looks good. So let's update that field. Now when we go back to objects, instead of pulling in the full object of offices, we should only be able to pull in just this option. So let's clear it out and let's see if we could find it. So let's select the drop down, and there we go. We only have that one option because we filtered down to only those results. So that's great for if you're pulling in information, and let's say that these are offices, and you pulled in a field from HVACs that should only be in the US. So you could narrow that down to each of these offices being within a country of United States. That way you're not pulling in a list of things that you can't actually associate with that object to reduce errors. So just a quick trick there if you're trying to reduce the total number of items that are shown, if you have either too long of a list or those things just do not apply. Now that we've created a few different object relationships, let's dive into the object graph and see how it could give us a bird's eye view and a little bit more of a visual representation of all the relationships that we have within our assets. So I pulled together a demo schema here, and this is going to be something that's on-prem scanned. And it's going to give us a lot of different relationships. So this is going to be a really good demo of how this tool is very powerful. Let's jump into ABM group, and we'll go into our object graph, which is going to be on the top right. We could click this button here, and this will open up our visual representation of all the items that we have with relationships. So you can see it gets pretty crazy here, and no worries, we'll go over how to filter this down. But the general idea is that you have your different objects and you see the exact relationships with these arrows. So you have these outbound and inbound references to these different devices and hosts that we have on our network. On the right, we have some fields that are associated with this particular object. So this is a host. It's been scanned, it's currently running, it's a little bit old, but has information related to it that's been scanned directly from a physical environment. So we could also look at these linked work items from here, which we have none of right now, but these are going to be our Jira tickets or Jira work items that come in. And to actually start filtering this down and making this graph useful, because at this point it's going to be way too much information and very hard to track down exactly what you want to find, there's going to be a little settings icon, and we can click this settings icon to give us a couple of things that will help. So the reference step is the first thing that I like to set, and let's set this at 2. You'll see how it cleans up quite a bit. So we only create 2 different relationships, or we only go down 2 different relationships instead of 4. Once you go down more than 3 or 4, you start getting into a lot of different relationships. So depending on how far down you want to go, definitely set that number lower if you want to see less information. And the other thing is the reference type. So as we went over and created these before, this is where it's really helpful to narrow down exactly what you want to find within this object graph. Let's say I want to pull in only information, maybe just scan settings within my host, and I want to see nothing else. So I'll uncheck all of my options, and I don't have anything here, unfortunately. So let me pull in the network interface instead. So I have 4 different network interfaces, and I could see the object relationships and how they interact with the object. And let's say I want to set this at 3. Let's see if I pull in any more information. Nothing here. Let me add in maybe a CPU and an operating system. There we go. So now we have our object, which we were looking at previously. We have all of the network interfaces. We have the CPU. And then we have a few more items, and we could see that now we have a couple of levels of different objects being related to our original host. So I could keep going down this path, maybe add like 5, and let's see what we get now. This might be a little bit crazy, but let's find out. Nope, we're still good. So it looks like there's no more relationships created between these two. But as we start adding back in our reference types, we'll start seeing more information as we go. So I definitely recommend unchecking some of these and going back through a few different items that you only want to see. That way you're not pulling in too much information and seeing too much things that you can't really keep track of anymore. So now that we have something like this, we can go through and see the discovery, we can see the scanning settings, we could see exactly all the information that's related to this host and how they're related. So let's think of this from maybe a business service perspective. Let's say that this host, I don't know if I have any relations. I don't have any relations to business services here, but let's say that this host supports a business service and an application on the front end that your company is hosting and providing to your customers. So you have your business service, let's say it's this item here, and you have your other business applications and supporting things and infrastructure, and then you're supporting host. So let's say that this host goes down. You could trace back exactly which service is going to go down with it. So let's say you need to take it down for some kind of maintenance or upgrades, and you open up a change management ticket. You could easily find and relate exactly which services, which front-facing client or customer items are going to be going down during that time frame or window of change. So if you're going through updating the storage on this device, you can add an outage time or downtime for these 3 particular services and notify your team, your department, your customers, etc. So that's one really simple and easy use case for this object graph. Obviously, you could get pretty in-depth with this, as you saw with all the object relationships that we have, but I recommend using some of these settings just to narrow down all of your options and see only what you want to see. So hopefully that helps, and I use this from time to time, not very often for things like maybe IT assets, but for anything on-prem or infrastructure related or business service and software related, I definitely use this quite a bit. Same thing with user and sometimes IT management if you want to see an object graph of what users are using, what hardware, that's also sometimes useful, but primarily for on-prem infrastructure and software related things. Really great way to see a very, very visual way of how your objects interact. Let's talk about the 3 different options that I recommend for reporting within your assets environment. So the first option is going to be essentially to export your data, pull it out of your assets, and report on it externally. You could do this within Excel, or if you already have another reporting tool that you want to use, this is going to be the best method to do so. So I'd go into an asset schema, and I'd go into an object type. So I'll pull up laptops as an example. I'll go to bulk action, and then we'll click on export objects. So this will export all of our laptops, and I could set the formatting and hit export, and that pulls a list directly and downloads it for me to use wherever I'd like. So again, I could export this out to Excel, and this is what I do oftentimes to find things like duplicates, for example. So if I want to go through this list and find anything that might be a duplicate, I could export to Excel, use some conditional formatting, and find it that way fairly easily. A couple other ways you can report on this is to use some charts, some pie charts, bar charts. There's a lot of ways you can do that in Excel, but obviously if you have other data outside of or other reporting tools outside of Jira or outside of your reports and schemas and assets, you can use those by just exporting and re-importing into those tools. So that's option number 1. Let's go over the other 2. Let's go over the second option we have for reporting in our asset schemas. So when you're looking at your homepage and you see your list of schemas, on the top left, you'll have your reports tab. And this is kind of the out-of-box reporting for all of your assets and data within your asset schemas. So these are a bit slow, so just keep that in mind. But I'll go ahead and create my first report. And maybe I'm going to want to report on laptops. And then I'll select the template. I could list objects by attribute, by issue, that's Jira issue, objects over time, and attribute analysis. I'll keep things very simple and do objects by attribute just because I want to see maybe how many laptops we have, how many types of models that we have that are being currently in use. So I just want to go through and see some of that data visualized. So the very top section is going to narrow down our all of the attributes that we're going to be, or all of the objects that we're going to be showing and reporting on. So I could add as many or as little amount of filters as I'd like. So I'll pull in and do maybe just an object schema filter. So I'll add IT employee assets, and I don't want to report on anything else other than anything in this specific schema. Then I'll go through and select which attribute I want to report on. So I'll go through and find model, And I'm going to pull in my laptop models to see maybe how many laptops I have of each model. And now I have a bar chart, a visual representation of our MacBooks and our ThinkPads and how much I have of each. So in this case, I have 14, 12, and 6. And I could go through and change the report that I'm pulling in. So if I pull in laptops, maybe I want to pull in the owners and see how many individual owners have how many laptops. So there's 3, 3, 2, 1. And again, just gives us a really clean visual representation of the data that we have in assets. This is very simple. It's not overly complex or robust, but it does get you through whatever reporting you need in a pinch. So this is the visual section. And then down below, we have a list of that data if we want to select that as well. So we'll do the same thing, laptop owners. So I'll search for that in my list, laptop owners. And that'll bring us the list of data of the actual objects in our schemas. So that'll look something like this. And we could also add more fields. So right now we just have object key and owner, but we could pull in more data like model. We could pull in, maybe I want to see the name, the laptop name. So I'll pull in laptop name, and then maybe I want to see the serial number as well. Laptop serial number. So I'll add all of these fields into the attributes, and now we should see them listed down here with a really clean and easy to see view of all of our data. So we have the object key, the name, the model, the owner, and the serial number. So I could go through and I could drill down into this data, and I could go into each individual object if I'd like. And as you can remember, we have our filters up top. So the more you filter this down and include specific object types, include specific object attributes, and even attribute values, that's what's going to be reported on in the visual section and then in the detail section with your list views down below. So this is the reporting that I use to get through in a pinch and be able to find very specific information or maybe total number of objects and assets within my schemas, and maybe be able to find some information that is going to help me make certain decisions. But again, it is very basic, and if we want something more advanced, we're going to have to go to option 3. So for the third option we have to report on our assets, we're going to be using a third-party plugin. I won't dive into the setup and configuration of these tools because you're probably already using one of these in your Jira environments. And there's quite a bit to go over since most of the reporting tools do include assets in some way, shape, or form. I will go through and recommend some of the apps that I've used personally and that I've had the best luck with. So the first one I'm going to recommend is the custom charts for Jira reports. And this one's really great to get started with because it'll do 99% of the reporting that you need with a very visual builder, very easy to use and get started way. So there might be that 1% of use cases or a couple of things that you can't do with this plugin. And if you're an absolute power user of Jira and assets, I would recommend using something like EasyBI. This is going to be your end-all be-all solution to pull in your data, report on it in any way that you'd like, not only from Jira and assets, but also from external data outside of Jira, and then report on that directly within your Jira dashboards, your filters, and all that good stuff. So custom charts and EasyBI are my two recommendations that I've personally used before. A couple of honorable mentions, reports, charts, and graphs for Jira dashboards. This one's really great for a free, they have a free version of this, and it's really great to get started with if you don't have or don't want to purchase a paid version to utilize reporting within the dashboard section of Jira. If you really want any kind of good or robust reporting, you're going to have to use a plugin, unfortunately, or you're going to have to use Atlassian Analytics, which are only included on the enterprise plan. If you do have analytics, I would recommend going with that first, trying it out, seeing if that's going to be a good solution for you. If analytics gets the job done, fantastic. That's what I would go with. If you don't have what you need with analytics, I would probably look into EasyBI at that point, or even just exporting your data externally and pulling it into something like Power BI or Tableau or something similar. That way you have all the reporting and capabilities that you need within from your data, and then you're using Jira kind of as a source of truth and just pulling and syncing that data from Jira to your reporting tools. But again, those are the two apps that I would personally recommend to utilize if you are needing something a little bit more robust that's not out of box, that you can't do with just exporting, but keep in mind that both of these are paid options. Both of them are fantastic for not only assets reporting, but also reporting just natively within Jira. If you want to use automations with Jira Assets, I'm going to show you exactly how to do that. Assets automation. So this is where things start to get a little bit more complicated, but a whole lot more fun. We could automate a lot of our assets, whether that's creation, updating, even deleting assets. So let's jump in and find out where those assets are located and some of those key different modules that we're going to be using during our automations. So to get to our automations, we click on the settings on the top right and then go to Jira admin settings. You may see system settings, but I see Jira admin settings from this view. So I'll jump into here. And again, if you're looking from Jira, you might see something like system. So you can go ahead and click on that instead. On the left side, you'll see global automation. So you do want to do this from global automation. You can't have the assets automations triggering or being created from your Jira projects. So you do have to come over to global automation and create them from this view. We're going to go ahead and create a rule, and I'll go over the few key modules that I end up using for a lot of my automations within assets. The first thing is going to be your triggers, and one of the things that I like to do just to see what options I have is to either click on assets trigger here or just type in the word object. This makes it a little bit easier, so I'll click on this, and now we have object as a trigger, and we have three options, which is created, updated, or deleted. These are the three triggers that we have specifically from the assets database. But I tend to trigger these quite a bit from the projects that we're going to be running these assets along with. For example, an IT team, when they get a ticket, we want to link a laptop to a specific user. That's not going to be an object trigger. That's going to be a trigger of ticket created. So these are the three triggers that we have specific to objects. Next, we're going to have conditions, and we have a few here that are related to objects. AQL is one of those that's very common, so we could go through and only run this rule based on a specific AQL, which narrows down and filters down to either one or a subsection of assets that you want to run your automation on. There's also smart value conditions. And one other thing that I'll mention, or actually probably not yet, but smart value conditions help you to be able to run and compare different values. So this does come in handy a lot of times when you're running different automations, specifically with assets. So next we have branches, and we have branch on AQL, which is very commonly used for being able to find a specific asset and then make changes to it. So for example, we could branch on something in our application portfolio, and then we could pull up a specific application. Then what we do with this branch is we add a then action, and then we go to our assets actions and we go to edit an object, and whatever object we found here in our branch, we're going to be editing here in this step. So this is required for certain steps that you're going to be running in your assets automation. Will give you a notification or a little error if you don't have those aligned correctly. So we'll look out for those notifications if they do pop up. And lastly, we do have these then actions. So we have all of our actions available here, and we have create object, edit object, and lookup object. Create object, pretty self-explanatory. We're creating a new asset within one of our schemas. Editing an object, which we're editing an existing object once we've already located it and found it. And then lookup object is a great way to find a specific object that you either want to associate or in some cases update. For example, lookup object is great for kind of that scenario I brought up with IT. You have an IT ticket submitted with a specific user, then you could look up which laptop that user has and associate that particular laptop with the ticket that was just created. The last thing I'll mention here is creating variables. And I can't clear this, but let me just add a new action. But variables are very powerful because they let us store different assets that we could reference in the future. So a lot of my automations tend to be very long and reference multiple assets somewhere in the past. So creating a variable for that, for example, we're going to be either looking up an object or branching on AQL. We could store that as a variable for a specific object, give that variable a name, and then reference it later. So those are the most common actions that we're going to be using. We'll go over a few specific use cases and a few different ways to create these in the next modules, but those for the most part are the the automation blocks that we're using to run all of our automations associated with assets. As we start automating our assets, we're going to be using a lot of AQL. So a lot of these branches and conditions and lookup objects, they're all going to be using AQL. So AQL is Asset Query Language, very similar to JQL, which is Jira Query Language. They actually use the exact same syntax. So if you're already familiar with JQL, this is going to be very easy to get the hang of. If you're not familiar with AQL, definitely watch this video and I'll give you a few really good pointers and tips on how you could get proficient with it a lot quicker. So what I like to do is essentially what I like to do within Jira, which is to pull up your filters, find the exact thing that you're looking for, switch over to the advanced filter view, and start to learn how that asset or asset query language is structured. So I'll pull up my IT assets and I'll go into something that has a good amount of assets and a list of assets. So cloud subscriptions, and I'll clear this out to make sure that I have nothing selected. And we have our list of assets here. And on the top right, we have filters. I'll click on that and start to filter down what I want to see. So let's say I want to see a status of only active items, which is in this case everything. So I'll go ahead and apply that, and now we have one filter applied. So I'll go back to my filters, and now we can click on Advanced AQL, and this is where we have our basic filter applied and where we could start to understand how assets are structured. So let's add one more. Let's say name equals box. So we'll select that. Very simple, we'll update. And now if we want to pull in just the specific item, we could go back to our filters, back to AQL, and we see exactly how our AQL is structured. So again, this is a very easy way to get the hang of how AQL is used. Same thing in Jira, you pull up a filter, you add your very basic functionality or basic things that you want to search for, and then you could see in JQL how that's written. Same concept here. So I'll go through and I might even just search for this with the basic search and then just paste this into my automation if I need to do so. But that makes it really easy for me to jump in here and create my AQL, but also validate my AQL. So once I'm a little bit more proficient in creating my AQL and the automations, I might type in something like object type equals, let's say, box or something that we just looked at, and I will close that parentheses. And I could validate my syntax, and my syntax is valid, but your automation may not be finding any objects, and you might be cracking your head open and saying, what's going on? Why is this not working? But what you could do is copy this over, go back to your object schema, paste it into your AQL search to see if anything shows up. So again, we get a valid AQL search because our syntax is correct, but when we update the filter, nothing shows up. So the problem is that we're actually just not able to bring in anything that's relevant or actually exists. So again, I use this to either create my AQL or to validate my AQL based on what I'm searching for. The last tool that I'll show that I use pretty much all the time, either for more advanced syntax or when I'm just running into some kind of issues, is ChatGPT. So AI is really great at creating these types of things, as you would assume. It's gotten really, really good in the past year. I would say that 80% of the time that I actually ask ChatGPT to create me the AQL or JQL, it's been fairly accurate. So before it was a complete hit or miss, and most of the time it actually didn't work. But with 4.0 and the recent advancements in AI, it's been really, really good. So I'll say something like create an AQL for an object type called, what did we have in here? We have cloud subscriptions. And I can even add a screenshot. Let me clear this filter to show you exactly how I would do this. And I'll screenshot this and I'll say cloud subscriptions, and I want to see the box item for object type of cloud sub, and I want to only see box. And I'll paste in my image. I'll go ahead and let it go, and it should come back with an AQL that works. Let's see if this works or not. Usually it does, but just to make sure, we'll test it out. Okay, object type equals cloud subscription and name equals box. Let's grab that, go to our filters, paste it in, and update. There we go. So ChatGPT is fairly great at this nowadays. So definitely use screenshots along with your prompts to be able to have ChatGPT see the exact terminology of these object types and objects and help you create those object filters. Sometimes I'll even ask ChatGPT to help me structure my automation correctly, because when it comes to assets, you do have to have your structure very, very specific, but also I could sometimes screenshot the entire structure that I currently built out and say, hey, help me debug this. And I'll even go through and show ChatGPT some of the errors that I'm running into to help debug some of the things that I may be running into. So those two resources are the two that I use to learn AQL and get very, very quick at it. So definitely check those out. If you're using AI, ChatGPT has been the best that I've used for something like this. Claude has been really great. Also Perplexity. I think at this point, it doesn't really matter which one you use. They've all been pretty great for me. Working with hundreds of clients within their Jira environments, I found that there are two primary automations that cover majority of all the types of automations that you would run within your own environment. So the first one that I'll be covering is going to be related specifically to updating assets information. So that can be triggered within assets or from Jira, and then that's going to update your asset information. We're going to do this all live, and I'm going to do it uncut. That way you can see exactly how I structure these automations and when or if we run into any kind of errors, what I do to debug those errors, and what I would test and try first. So let's jump in and go ahead and pull up an asset schema to see what we'll want to update. So let's say that we have an application portfolio and we pull up an application Let's do amplify since that's the first one I see, and we'll go ahead and automate something here. So let's say that a ticket comes in and we want to update this status to, instead of production, we want to update it to closed. So this might be related to maybe a customer ticket or an internal ticket saying that something's down or something has a problem, and we want to automate a status change. That way we know that there may be some kind of an issue with a particular application. So just one small use case of actually updating this information, and you could do this with any of these fields, by the way. I'm just using status since that is very common. You could either do like a schedule change or a trigger change. And if something does go down, whether that's on-prem, on your cloud, any kind of physical assets, software-related things, you can update that information within your asset schema based on a ticket that comes in within Jira. So let's go to our rules and we'll create a new automation. And we'll say issue created within our ITS project, or let's just say issue created. We'll keep things open for now since we don't want to specify too much since this is a demo environment, nobody's using it. But if you did want to specify a project, I would add a condition to make sure that your specific project and request type is created for this to trigger. Again, we'll leave it open because this is just a demo environment that nobody's using, and we'll keep things as simple as possible for the demo. So when an issue is created, what we're going to want to do is find the actual object first. So what we're going to do is pull up our application portfolio and then our object type of application. So let's go to our rule builder, application portfolio. That's the first thing we have. And then our object type is going to equal application. And we'll want to be updating specifically amplify. So I'll just copy that over and make sure that I don't misspell anything. And object equals amplify. So we'll validate here. The syntax is valid. Let's go back to our object schema, and I'll use one of my tricks from AQL that I mentioned earlier. We'll make sure that I could pull in the correct thing. And so it looks like we're not pulling in the correct thing. So let's go ahead and fix what's going on here. Object type equals application and object equals amplify. So let's just go to basic and find it since that's not working, and we'll make things really easy on us. Object and amplify. So there was my syntax error. I can't use equals in that case, and that's something I could have asked ChatGPT as well, but let's give this a shot and just make sure that the whole syntax works correctly. Perfect, there we go. So again, there's a really perfect use case for being able to reference your AQL. If I didn't set that correctly, I wouldn't have been pulling in any objects, even though my syntax would have been valid, and I would have been racking my brain trying to figure out where my automation is going wrong when it was just a simple query mistake. So issue created, we're finding an object, which is amplify. The next thing we're going to want to do is update the object, which is going to be us taking an action. And then we're going to find our asset actions. I'll just pull all of those up. We'll edit an object, which we're pulling in from here already. And then we'll select our status. I believe it was status. Let's just make sure that that was the correct field. Status, perfect. And then we'll change it to, let's say at risk. That might be appropriate here. So let's change our status to at risk. And I might have to, there we go. I might have to add parentheses there or something similar. But let's see if we can pull up our status and find that in our syntax to see if we can make sure that that's correct. So status, let's pull up just a random one just to see what it looks like inside of AQL in production. So I will put parentheses around it since that's what it's using there as well. Let's see if that will work. If not, we can always reference it later and tweak it if we need to. Okay, so let's keep this very simple. Issue created. For EQL, then edit object attribute at risk. So we're just changing the object attribute for one object, and that's it. For now, I'll go ahead and delete this and just do a schedule trigger. The reason I'm doing a schedule trigger is because when I turn this rule on, test object update, there's going to be a 3-dot option here. And actually, I could actually run the rule without needing to go into Jira, submit a ticket, make sure everything works correctly. So what I'll do oftentimes is actually create my automation, go back, change this to scheduled, run it through manually, make sure it actually works and functions, go through my audit log. So boom, we got an error here. So instead of submitting tickets, taking time to do that, going back and forth. I could test and make sure really quickly that I can find and fine tune and make sure I resolve any errors that come up. So let's see, we're unable to, so attribute value is not valid on objects. So so it looks like our issue was specifically with at risk. Let's try removing the parentheses and running it one more time. If that fixes it, we're great. Perfect. So we did not need the parentheses. So again, it does depend on which field you're editing, how you're editing them. If you're editing an object directly from a Jira task, if you're editing a Jira field, which we'll go over a little bit later in the next automation, you do need to add the syntax there. So it really depends on what you're editing. So I highly suggest just using a manual automation to run it, make sure everything looks good, and then changing it to the actual trigger that you need to set up for this automation. So let's go back to our object just to make sure that that change did in fact happen. Great, our status changed to at risk. I could take a look at the activity log to see, and automation for Jira did make that change. So now that I know my syntax is valid, now that I know my automation will run, I'll go back through and add in all my components. So issue created, make sure the condition for a field is set to, for project. Maybe I want to only apply this to ITS, so IT support, and I'll maybe add a specific request type. So I'll go through and just fill out all of my information that I want to make sure that gets properly conditioned on. Maybe this is going to be for decommissioning a laptop or something. And then we want to add our AQL and our status change. And the one thing that I'll add here is that sometimes we will need to use different smart values for this rather than editing objects directly. So what do I mean by that, and why do smart values matter in this case? So definitely do some research on smart values, and ChatGPT is a great help there as well. But if you do want to make some of these changes conditional and not just for a specific object, you can do so by using smart values. So for example, what if I want to add inside of the ticket a field for which application I'm changing? So in the form, let's say that we have application for Amplify, and that's the option that gets selected. When Amplify gets selected, that's the one that we want to change. We don't always want to change Amplify. We want to select or change the one that was selected based on this list. So what we could do there is create a smart value, and we could add an action or something similar, or we could pull it directly from the issue, but I'll just show it here as an action and create a variable. So this variable is going to be named something like app, so I'll keep it very simple. And our smart value is going to be something like issue.custom field underscore, and we'll add a custom field ID. So it'll look something like this. You could find your custom field ID by going to settings and then going to your issues, and then in here you could find your custom field, and then you could pull up whichever one you need. You go to context and default values, and then it's going to show up in your URL at the very end. So here's our ID, and that might have been the custom field we used within our form to identify which application was selected. So we'll add that in. Now we're referencing app, which is going to be our new smart value, and then we could go in, and instead of updating Amplify, we could update smart value app. So now it's going to switch anytime that we are submitting a ticket on our form with that specific application that was selected within a field. I'll go over exactly what this looks like in the next module, in the next video, because we're going to be talking directly about how to update a field within a Jira ticket. In this one, I just wanted to show up how to update an asset, but a lot of the things that we're going to do in the next video is going to apply to something that you could do here based on smart values and a lot of other conditions. All right, this next automation is going to be a little bit more complicated, but what we're going to be doing is looking at tickets that are submitted into our queue, finding the linked assets or information associated with the customer that submitted the request, and pulling in that asset directly into the ticket. So before we can do this, we need to make sure that we have a custom field that exists with the particular asset that we actually need. So we'll use laptop as an example, and if I go over to my custom fields, my issues, custom fields, I'll search for laptop, and I'll go over to my associated laptops, go to context and default values. You can create one of these fields and then add all this context and information directly here. We do cover some of this on our webinar if you want to check that out. I think we'll also link that webinar as kind of an initial intro to this course at the very top. So if you want to check that out and look at how we built this, feel free to take a look at it there. But we select our schema, we filter out our AQL to make sure we're selecting the correct objects, and adding in the user interaction that we want to show on that field. So once we've created that custom field and linked it to our project, what we want to do is create an automation that's going to pull in that information as soon as a user creates a request. So we're going to do that by going back to our IT support project. We'll go back into one of the tickets, and we'll make sure that we have a request type that is going to align with what we're looking for. So an incident is going to be what we're looking for in this scenario. Let's go to our project settings really quickly, go to an incident. Report broken assets, perfect. Someone might have a broken laptop, so we want to pull in their information based on who they are when they're creating the request. So let's go to our settings, go to our system settings, go to global automation, and let's start building. We'll create a rule, and we'll select a trigger of issue created because we're going to be triggering this as soon as a customer submits a request. We'll make sure that it runs only on the project ITS, and for now, we'll make sure that it only runs on the incidents. We could have this run on request types, which definitely makes sense. But just for demo purposes, I'll show how to narrow this down all the way down to request type. So incident or report broken asset, I believe was what it was called. Perfect. So now we're running this automation only during IT support requests that are created specifically with an incident request type. So the next thing we're going to do is we don't have to add a smart value, but I do like to, or sorry, not a smart value, a variable. I do like to add the variable of which user this is. And I think in this case, we do need to add a variable based on the name of the user. Let's test it out just to make sure that we are pulling in the correct information during this automation when it runs. So let's go to my laptop schema and we'll start building out the object that we need to find. So let's pull in a laptop, which we have only one. And we have Alana Grant, and she's the owner of this laptop. So Alana Grant will make sure that we create a variable for that individual. So based on the reporter, that's what we want to pull in the information on. So let's say laptop owner is going to be our variable name, and then issue.reporter is going to be our smart value that we're pulling in. So issue.reporter is now laptop owner. And what we're going to do is we're going to search for an object or look up an object. We're going to look up an object inside of our IT employee assets, and we're going to add a query of object type equals, open parentheses, and what did we have here? Laptops. So very simple so far. Laptops, and we want to make sure that we pull in only the owner of Alana Grant. And owner equals, might be in or equals. Let's see if I can figure this one out. Attributes or objects, let's see, filter in only Alana Grant, owner in PPL-215. So this is going to look a little bit different actually because we're pulling in the owner based on another object, but let me add one more field that's going to be based on a user. Owner user. Let's say owner user, and we'll just do user field. That way we could pull directly from the users in our Atlassian user group. And let's see if we could pull in Alana. The reason I'm not using this one is because it's a different object in a different object schema, so we'd have to do multiple lookups. So this does make it a little bit more streamlined, and since Alana's already submitting requests, she most likely has an account, so I'll just add that individual here. So owner user is what we're going to use instead. So and owner user equals Alana Grant, and let's see if we could pull in the correct syntax and information for that. Clear this out. Oh, looks like we do have more laptops. Owner user Alana Grant, update that. Perfect. So this is the syntax that we're going to want to use in. Perfect. And I'll pull this into here. Owner user in. And then what we're going to want to do is add the smart value that we just created, which was laptop, open comma, smart value. There we go. Owner or laptop owner. Okay, there we go. So now we have our smart value in here, but one thing that I did see here when looking up the syntax was we're not pulling in the name or the email, we're pulling in the user ID. So what we could do, and why I created this variable, was to change and to be able to make sure that we pull in the correct information based on the issue reporter. So if we do something like .name, we're going to be pulling in the issue reporter's name. If we do something like, issue reporter, I believe that's just pulling in the email. You could also do other things based on the smart value. But what we want here is the user ID, which I know because it's a list of numbers, and a user ID is essentially just a string of numbers that we're going to be pulling in. So I don't remember what the exact syntax was. So I'll literally just go to ChatGPT and say, can you give me the smart value for this field that will be user ID? And I'll paste that in here. And let's see what a ChatGPT comes back with. Issue reporter account ID. Okay, I think that's correct. So let's try it out. So now we're creating a variable with a laptop owner as the variable name, and we're pulling the issue reporter's account ID. And what we're doing is looking up in our IT employee asset schema, specifically the object type of laptops and the owner, which is our user ID. And what we're going to do then is we're going to add an action, and we're going to edit the issue, and we're going to find the laptop field. We pull in the laptop, and in here, we cannot enter a laptop name, key, or anything like that. It has to be the syntax of what we're pulling in. So when we look up an object, it creates a new variable for us called lookup object. So we can't just paste that in here, as I mentioned, because it's not going to work. What we have to do is give this the exact syntax that AQL is using. So key in lookup objects. So something like that. So most likely I'll run into an error here, at least I think I will. So one thing that I will do is log a couple of actions. So I'll go to another action, I'll type in log and log action, and then what we could do is make sure that the actual action or smart values that we're creating are they're going to be listed within our automation logs to see if they're showing up correctly. So lookup object, I'll make sure that we are getting the correct lookup object, which is going to be our laptop, and that's going to be the key. If it's not the key, if it's the name, I'll need to change what this looks like. And then I'll do the same exact thing for, oops, I accidentally deleted it. Let me do that one more time, log action, and then I'll add in my lookup objects, and I'll copy it over this time, and we'll do the same exact thing for our variable of laptop owner. That way we could see exactly what we're getting back with our smart values, and we could adjust as needed. Let's turn this rule on and say laptop update, very simple name. All right, now we can go ahead and create an issue within our Jira project and see if this automation works correctly. Let's go to our project, go to IT support, go to our summary or somewhere else. We'll create a new issue, and we'll make sure that this is going to be an incident or a report broken asset. And we'll make sure that Alana Grant reports this. Help, my laptop is broken. Oh, broken. There we go. So we could also select which asset, which is another thing that we can do on the portal and within our creation of assets here. So you could see that it should pull in only Alana's asset. We'll cover that in a later video. But for now, we just want to be able to automate assets being pulled into a ticket. So we'll add in test here just to make sure all of our required fields are filled out. We'll hit create, and we'll go back to our rule builder. We'll go to our audit log and see if we run into any errors. And we did run into errors, so let's find out what's going on. So as you can see, we're logging this information, which helps us be able to see exactly what's getting added. So our user ID is working correctly, which is great. And object schema ID equals 6. So AQL here is looking a little bit weird, and I think that's what the problem is. Looks like we're also not pulling up the correct laptop. So let's jump in and take a quick look at what's happening with that lookup objects. So lookup objects, object type equals laptops and owner user. I think this might need to be in parentheses because it is 2 words. So let's try that out instead. I think everything else does look good. And then when we look up that object, we should be able to log it. And when I am looking at this error, I do see that this log showed up empty for laptop. So my hunch is that our AQL for that owner user was incorrect, and that's what tripped it up, and we weren't able to find the correct laptop. So we updated everything. Let's go ahead and do the same exact thing that we just did. open a new ticket on behalf of Alana Grant, and we'll run that test again and make sure that our audit log stops erroring out. If we run into more errors, we'll debug one more time. Awesome. So we've debugged everything. We have our log coming in correctly. We have our IT asset coming in correctly. Now let's go back to the issue that we just created and make sure that our laptop did in fact link. And let's search for test. There it is. And let's see if we have our laptop. I don't see our laptop. Let me look at the history logs. So we do have a laptop added, but I don't see it in my list here. Let's see. Maybe it's in the more field section. Laptop. Associated laptops. Looks like it's gotten lost somewhere. Let's see if I could refresh and find that field. Sometimes we do get a couple of bugs in Jira, so that is all par for the course. But we are getting our laptop. Oh, I think I know what's going on here. We didn't add the field to our our issue view specifically for incidents. So I'll go in here, search for laptops, make sure that's added, and we'll go back into our issue view, and we'll make sure that it is showing up correctly. There we go. So again, running into some issues here, all part of the challenge of working with assets. Definitely make sure your fields are associated with your issue types and your incidents and all of your request types before you run this. But it does work. Just make sure that if you do see this and you don't see the field, you add the field afterwards. So that's pretty much it. We've created our automation and we've looked up an object. We've associated the object that was associated with the user. So we essentially have to go through a couple of different loops to be able to make that happen. Now that I know that our automation runs, I may remove some of these logs. That way we don't need to have unnecessary steps within our automation, and I'll update it. If I do need to bring them back anytime in the future when I'm troubleshooting this, I could go back, re-add them, and we can go through the troubleshooting steps again. So this last part isn't technically an automation, but I do want to show you how to filter down your results in your asset custom field based on AQL. So why would this be useful? The primary thing that I've seen this used for is for IT support. And let's say that Alana Grant is submitting a ticket. I'll show you this on the back end, but it obviously does work on the portal as well. And Alana is submitting a ticket for her laptop or whatever other piece of hardware she might be using that she's having a problem with. In this field, we have a dropdown, and we actually filter this down to only show the specific assets that she is using. This could be a laptop, this could be monitors, a dock, any other hardware, headset, whatever else she may have. And this is really cool because Alana can go to the portal, submit a ticket that she's having a problem with an asset, and select the exact asset herself that she's having a problem with. So how do we do this, and how do we accomplish this within our custom fields? So we'll go through and set up the custom field as we normally would within our asset or within our custom fields, and then we'll go to edit our asset object configurations. And that's what this second field is going to be used for. So we could filter down the scope of this AQL for us to be able to search for and the values that will appear in this AQL. And then we could filter down the issue scope AQL. And in this case, what we're doing is pulling in the owner user and mapping that to the reporter. So if I go back to our laptops, I'm pulling in the owner user and I'm just mapping that to the reporter that's submitting the ticket. So owner user in parentheses AQL equals $ open parentheses reporter, curly bracket, close curly bracket. And you could find out a little bit more about filter issue scopes here if you click on this link. That'll go through and tell you exactly how to build these, or again, just use ChatGPT for this. But again, this is really cool to be able to filter down certain asset schemas and object types to be able to bring in all the information associated with this particular individual and only show them their specific assets. Real quick, if you're running a 10 to 200 person team and you're trying to set this up by yourself, the hardest part really isn't the configuration. It's getting your team to actually use what you built. After implementing Jira over 200 times myself, that's the pattern that I see every single time. Someone builds it out, the end users end up ignoring it, and 6 months later, you're trying to figure out what went wrong and how to fix it. And the mistake most end up making is that they configure the tool first and hope that the team adapts. We actually do the opposite. We fix the underlying process first and then build Jira around it. That's why it ends up sticking. Because we're so hands-on, we operate on a wait list, and our next kickoffs are 4 to 6 weeks out. And if you want to implement Jira so that it actually gets utilized, click the first link in the description. If you want to import external data into Jira Assets, I'm going to show you all of the options you have available and how to actually use them. Let's jump into importing your assets. So I'm going to cover 3 different options. The first of which I recommend pretty much every single time, which is CSV imports. So you could export from your current platform, or if you're already managing something in Excel, it's going to be fairly straightforward to jump in and import with CSV directly into your schemas. Now, there's a few things to know specifically with identifiers, creating relationships, and some of the settings that we're going to be configuring during this import to make this most effective and bringing your data in the most clean way possible. So I'll cover all of that, but CSV import is going to be your best bet majority of the time. The second option is going to be apps or API integration or migration. So these options I typically use if we're doing some kind of a live sync. So for example, if we have Azure or Intune and we're building a live sync to bring that data into our schemas, and then we're going to sync that on a daily basis, either a 2-way sync or a 1-way sync. I won't go directly into API since that's going to be a 10-hour course in and of itself. But I will go over some of the apps that I use and recommend all the time and that I've had success with in the past. And last but not least, we'll be going over our asset discovery agent. So this agent goes on-prem and gets installed on one of your networks or data centers, and it scans in everything within that network in the listed IP addresses that you give it. So it'll bring in all that data, it'll upload that data directly to your cloud environments, your Jira cloud environments, and it'll keep them updated on either a daily or a weekly basis. So if you do have any data centers or on-prem infrastructure, this is going to be your way to go for that specific type of data. So we'll cover all of that. And again, my suggestion here is probably stick with CSV. If any of those other options sound like there's something you would use, jump through and select those and just go through the course based on the 3 items that I just listed. Let's jump into importing with CSV. So I created a quick CSV as a template that we're going to be uploading into our schemas. And I'll show you the 2 options that we have when uploading and the way that I recommend doing this to make sure that we have no data loss and we get our fields imported nicely and cleanly and even create relationships between different assets. For example, model is actually a different objects within our object schemas, and I could link those directly to those objects using CSV. Same thing with owner, which is pretty neat and keeps things very clean, especially when you have a lot of object relationships. So to show you what I mean, I'll go to my IT employee assets, and these are laptops. And if I pull up a random laptop, you'll see that I have a model, which is actually another object, and I could click on that to go to that object, which already exists. And then I could do the same thing with owner, Alana Grant, and that's going to take me to this owner, which is another object. I'll show you exactly how to upload that with your CSVs. But before I jump into actually uploading and going into an existing schema, we're going to show you how to upload and use the toggle that I showed earlier with uploads, specifically with making sure that your CSVs, attributes, and fields are all created automatically. There are use cases for that in some cases, just because you may have a lot of fields that are just text fields, and you don't want to go through and manually create those. So in that case, I would use that toggle. Otherwise, if you're trying to import data with different field types like serial numbers, status dropdowns, model relationships, number fields, it's not going to make sense to do that, and I'll show you exactly why. So I'll take this CSV, and we'll go back to create a new schema, and we'll just name this laptops since I don't want to import to the existing schema yet. I want to show you exactly what this is going to look like when we select the system to create the fields for us. So I actually won't add an object type. I'll leave it completely blank because Jira's going to take care of that for us. So I'll go to my schema settings. I'll go to the import tab, and then we're going to create a brand new import. We're going to select CSV. This is how we start all of our processes with importing. And I'm going to type in laptop. And now I'll browse and select that file that I just had open. This is just local that I'm uploading. And now instead of unchecking this box, I'm going to leave this checked for Atlassian and Jira to create all this on my behalf. So I'll create my import, and you'll see in just a moment we'll have our import showing up. Now we could go to edit our mapping, and you can see it's already ready to run without us having to do any manual work. So we could go to the edit attribute mapping, and Jira actually created all of this information for us by default and pre-mapped it. Now when we run this import, it should take just a moment because it's a fairly small file. Let's go back to our laptops. We now have an object type created automatically with every single field that we want to import into our object schema. So this is really cool, and we don't have to do any work. It makes it really easy for us to just grab a file, upload, and all of our data is in our asset schema. Now, the problem that we see here is that every single one of these is a text field because it was created by Jira automatically. Now, we can go through and modify these during that upload when we're doing some of the attribute editing, but I wouldn't recommend doing that. And here's what I would recommend doing instead. So I'll go back to my schema and back to my IT employee assets, to my laptops, and I'd build out something like this first. I would build out my object types, then I'd build out my objects with all of my attributes and everything I need, including my relationships. Now we have things like these relationships with models, we have status dropdowns, and a whole bunch more that are not just text fields that we saw earlier. So once I have this built out, here's the process I would take. Let's go to our schema settings once again, go to the import tab, and we'll create the brand new import just like we did before. So very simple process, and I'll go ahead and select my file, the same exact one that I had previously. And instead of having this checked, I will uncheck this box in this case to show you exactly what that mapping is going to look like and what we're going to do when we create this import. So same thing happens, we have this line item created. Now we could go through and edit the mapping. And as you can see, nothing is mapped, so we have to go through and do all this manually. Now, if you have your file, your CSV file, and you have like 100 different rows here, and those are all going to be your attributes that you're importing, this will take some time, so keep that in mind. But if 95% of these are going to be text fields, it probably doesn't make sense to do this. Leave that toggle checked on and make it a lot easier for yourselves to be able to import this data and maybe modify it later. So I'll go ahead and create a mapping, and we're going to be running this into our laptops. I'll leave everything else out of box for the most part. You don't really need to change anything here unless you're very specific about, case sensitive or not case sensitive, or when you're running uploads again. This is primarily for running multiple uploads. So feel free to check into what these settings do, like missing objects. You could either remove them, ignore them, update them. That way you could have things like if you're missing an object during that upload, you could change something to missing or down or something like that for notifications. But I'll leave everything out of box for now, since for the most part, that's going to be what we need. So I'll create my object type, and then I'll go to edit the mapping. And the first thing we're going to do is add the name, since that's what is used as our identifier. And we'll go down this list and add everything else that we need to import. So looking at my file, I have name, serial number, status. So I'll just go through that list: name, serial number, add, status, add, and we'll just go through and map the rest of our fields just like that. These data source fields are being pulled directly from our columns in our CSV, and these destination attributes are being pulled directly from Jira and our asset schema. So that's how we map all of our fields, and things like status, for example, as long as we have the same name, it's going to be selecting the same status from the dropdown instead of creating a text field. So let's go ahead and go over how we create our different object relationships. So you can see here we have model, and we have a couple of different models coming in this case. And we want to be able to map these models directly to those different objects rather than just bringing this in as a text field. So how do we do that? So we could go through and select model, since that's what we have in our CSV, and it's the same exact field name in our destination attribute, and we'll click add. So when you click add, you run into this error. Because this is already an object field, we have to specify an AQL so that it pulls in the correct information. And here's exactly the AQL that we need to use. And this is going to be a little bit different than the AQL that you're used to and that we went over in the module, just because we're pulling in live data from our data source field rather than specifying a specific object. But I'll try to break this down and make it very, very simple. So as we're writing AQL, you already know that we're going to be defining exactly the items that we want to find. So in this case, we have MacBook Pro 13 Space Gray. Let me just jump into our schema. And let's go over and check what our model looks like on the back end, just so we know what we're referencing. So supported laptops, and then we have MacBook Pro 13 Space Gray. Let's open that. So it looks like we're pulling the name. We could pull any other field, but in this case, we're pulling the name. So let's type in name equals, and then all we have to do is specify the name of the object to be able to pull in the correct information. But if we do that, let's say we specify the name is MacBook Pro 13-inch Space Gray. I could just paste that in here and we'd be good to go. We could pull in our object specifically. If it's just this one object, our job is done. We run the import and we're good to go. But in this case, we have one that's 16 and then one that's 13. So we have two different options, and we want to be able to pull this dynamically. If your list has a ton of different options, you want to go through and make sure that all the correct models are being pulled. Same thing with your owners. So the way that we do that is, instead of specifying a specific object name, what we do is we use this exact syntax. So we add a $sign, and then we do open curly bracket, and then we type in the name of this field, which is model. And this does get a little bit redundant with the amount of model that we're adding here. But essentially, we're pulling in the name, or we're specifying that the AQL, the name equals $model, which is just pulling the information from this data source field. Once we have that added and our AQL is good to go, we can click add, and now our field and AQL is added. I'll go through the same exact process for owner because it is also a field that is an object. So I'll map owner to owner, and we'll do the same exact thing for owner. I believe it was name equals, and let's just make sure that that was the correct syntax and what I'm pulling in. Let me go to IT employee assets and see which assets are being used just to verify that it's the correct one. So let's go to this owner, name, yep, that's the field we're looking for. Name equals, and then we'll do the same exact thing, $, open curly bracket, owner, and close curly bracket. So we'll add that field in, and then once we have all of our fields mapped, we are good to go. I think I'm just missing cost. So I'll add in one more field of cost and map it to this cost field. Let me just make sure I'm not missing anything during this import. Name, serial number, status, model, cost, and owner. Perfect. So I have everything mapped. The last thing to do is to make sure I have my identifier set correctly. So the identifier is going to be looking at, and I'll pull up my IT assets to show you exactly what I mean. The identifier is going to be looking at one of these fields to see if it already exists. If it does exist, it's going to update the information. If it does not exist, it's going to create a new one. So in this case, I have one that's actually a duplicate, and we're changing the status from active to at risk. So let me pull in this field and see if I could find it in my schema. So let's pull this one up. So as you can see here, this already exists. And in this case, we're going to be using the name as our unique identifier. Since it is a unique value, we could also use serial number since that's also unique. But in this case, name is going to be the most straightforward thing for myself to use. So all we're going to be doing is finding this instead of creating a new one and then updating it to at risk. The serial number is going to be exactly the same. So all we're updating is this field here. So this should change as soon as we run the import. And then the rest of these will be created as new assets. So let's run through this and make sure everything looks good. Once this looks good to me and I know I'm ready to run this, I'll click on the three dots and enable this. Once it's enabled, we see the ready to run, and we could import our data. So again, it should be fairly quick since it's a very small file. Once it runs, you could read your details to make sure nothing errored out. If you did have errors, you'll have a log here to be able to review exactly what errored out and why. In this case, we have everything that ran smoothly and the import finished. So let's jump into our asset that we have that should have updated, give it a quick refresh to see if anything changed. There we go. So it changed to at risk, just like we had in our CSV file, and we didn't get anything new created for this specific asset. You could even see in the activity log that I changed this from active to at risk just now. So let's go ahead and see if we have our new assets created within our laptops. There we go. We have laptop 1, 2, and 3. And let's jump in to make sure our relationships came over correctly. And there we go. We have our model, we have our owner, we have our status. Everything came over just the way we wanted it to, with the exact formatting and the exact information and relationships that we intended. So that's exactly how you go through and create all of your relationships and make sure that all of your data comes over cleanly. So my recommendation here, especially if you're using a lot of different mappings and field types like drop-downs, dates, etc., go through, create all of your schemas first, then run the import while attaching all of your fields to or using the import settings. So I would recommend that path unless you're already, have a very long list or a lot of different rows within your CSV, and pretty much all of them are text. Majority of the time, I'm going to be running the manual import for most of the clients that I've worked with, but in some cases I have just checked the auto import or auto create for me and then ran that just because it was a really, really large file with a lot of different text fields. But that's it for CSV importing. Let's jump into our apps and API next. API and application importing. I'm not going to dive into how to set up your APIs and actually run them into Jira. That would be a whole 10-hour course in and of itself. But I do want to go over some of the apps that I recommend and that I've used in the past to either sync from a source of truth externally from assets into Jira, or have some kind of an importing tool that's going to bring your data over into your Jira environment from like a one-time solution. So there's a couple of things that I recommend doing here. And the first thing that I want to dive into is your backups and your sandboxes. So the big critical thing within Jira is that you can create your sandboxes and pull over production data. But the big problem is that it does not pull over any of your assets into your sandbox. So it's very critical in a lot of cases if you're doing a lot of work with assets and you want to be able to test out a lot of things to bring your assets over from production into sandbox and run your testing. So since there's no native feature for that, there are a few plugins that do this very well. This Insight Asset Backup and Migration, I have no affiliation with any of these apps, by the way. I have no partners, no sponsors, nothing. These are just apps that I've used, that I've worked with, or that I've found work very well for my use cases. So this is going to do two things. Number one, it's going to bridge the gap between that sandbox solution and copy over your production data into your sandbox. And number two, it's just going to give you a great way to back up your data. So if you're storing a lot of assets that are very critical to your day-to-day operations, or you have to have some kind of compliance, this is going to be a great solution for that. I've also heard great things about Reviz. They're a pretty big backup solution within the Jira space, so feel free to check them out as well. This is just the one that I've used primarily, and I found that works really, really great with sandboxes, since a lot of clients that I work with have a very big assets environment that we need to test within our sandbox environments. So this will give you the ability to sync between the two, push data between the two very easily, and it's a very great UI, which is something that you don't find often within Jira apps. So I really enjoyed using this one, and it's why I recommend it. Now, the other way to import your data into Jira is going to be using a plugin similar to this. So either you're going to pull your data over once, for example, from maybe Okta into Jira, or you want to have a live sync from your other environments. And a really great example of that is Intune. A lot of organizations and a lot of clients that I've worked with want to manage their devices and have a source of truth of Intune, pull that data over into your assets. That way you could have your Jira integration directly with assets, and being able to link that information directly to your Jira tickets. So you pull over your data weekly, daily, hourly if you'd like, and all of your assets are up to date based on your source of truth or whatever place you're syncing from. So this is the solution that I found to that. PIO, don't know exactly how to pronounce them. I have no affiliation with them, but really great app that I've used before, specifically the Azure AD and the Intune one. It's pretty much a set it and forget it. It was very, very simple to get it up and running. You set up a scheduler and it just runs automatically and keeps everything up to date with a source of truth. Now they have a ton of other stuff like Jamf, AWS, even HubSpot. So if you're interested in syncing from an external source into Jira, this is the solution I would use. All right, now we're getting into the nitty-gritty and really fun stuff of bringing your data into your asset schemas. So we're going to be going over the Asset Discovery Agent, how to get it set up and installed on your local environment, and then from there getting that data into your cloud environment and your schemas. So the first thing we're going to need to do is set up a machine or host a machine. Maybe you already have one that you could use that could actually host this piece of software and run it. The two platforms that we could run this on are Windows and Linux. Now on the Linux version, you are going to have some kind of UI that you need to use to be able to host this. There is no non-UI version that is supported currently, so make sure you have some kind of a GUI running on your Linux device if you're using a Linux solution. Now, I'll be running this on a Windows platform, but after we get it installed, everything else is the same from that point forward. So the first thing we're going to do is go to this Assets Discovery, and it's going to be directly in the Jira Marketplace, and we're going to click on Get It Now, and this is going to download an app directly that we're going to be opening and running on our local environment. So I've downloaded I've clicked on Get It Now and downloaded the file. I'll pull up the file in my downloads, and we'll go ahead and just extract that file. So I'll click on the file, click on Extract, and I'll leave it here for now, and we'll just extract everything. And now we're going to run the Discovery Agent setup.msi. So just run through this, go through all of the configurations and settings that they suggest, including the folder where this is stored, unless you very specifically want to change that. Otherwise, you're going to have a different location for where this information is going to be stored. I typically leave this on just me, but I would recommend doing this for everyone, especially if you have multiple people logging into your environments, and they want to be able to configure and change the settings depending on who's logged in. We are going to run this as a service later, so it won't really matter if it's logged in or not. But in order to change the configuration and settings, I would recommend setting this to everyone if you're doing this in some kind of an enterprise environment. Now we'll click next and just go through the install, click on yes, run through this whole process. It should take only a couple minutes. Once it's done, we could go ahead and jump into our environment and start the configuration. So I'll exit the installation. I think it might not work because I already have it installed. But once it's installed, what we'll do is go over to exactly where we installed based on that directory that we had earlier. So it's going to be in the local disk if you left it as default, program files, Atlassian, and then we're going to have Discovery Agent. So I'll jump into Discovery Agent. And this is where we're going to have all of our information for discovery. And it looks like I may have, it's going to be Discovery Tools. So Discovery Tools is what we'll jump into. And there's going to be a couple of things that we're using here to set up and configure our agent and to run it. So we're not going to be jumping in and clicking on these files directly. What we actually need to do is pull up our command prompt. And then we'll need to pull up the directory. So I just click on this directory here. If you're not super familiar with command prompt and how to change directories, I'll walk you through it as best as I can. So you're going to just copy this exact path, and then I'm going to type in cd space, and then I'll paste that exact path in and click enter. So now we're in our Discovery Tools directory within our command prompt, and what we're going to do is type in discovery.exe-s. So this is actually going to pull up our setup for our discovery. And if we run just discovery.exe, that actually runs the discovery without the setup. So I'll click on enter, click on yes, and that will run our discovery setup. And you'll be asked to either set up a password or enter in a password if this has already been running for you. So I've already run this before, and I'll go ahead and enter the password that I had set up earlier. But once you're in, and once you've created your password, you should be brought to a screen that looks like this. So this is going to be our configuration for everything that's related to our assets discovery. Once we're done configuring here, we'll run discovery.exe one more time, and that'll actually run the active discovery. So let's go into the common tab and take a look at what we have here. So this is going to be your general settings for discovery. Most of what's out of box here will probably stay. There's only a couple of things I recommend changing here if you need to, which would be like number of threads and a maximum scan thread time. If you want to change that, if you're running into kind of bottlenecks or you need more bandwidth, if you have a very, very large scan that you're running in, you might need to increase the number of threads. Otherwise, you could leave it as is. Log level, in some cases, we could set this to debug. Normal is fine unless you're running into a specific issue with scanning in specific hardware that you might be missing or don't have the logs to. So in some cases, you might switch this to debug just to get more information on the logs that are coming out of your scanner. So a few other options here like deleting, creating, using PowerShell, deleting duplicate devices. Most of this I would leave out of box unless you're dealing with specific issues during your exports, which we'll go over in a second. If you're dealing with those issues, try going through some of these settings and configuring them to see what makes most sense for you. You could also change your password here and change some other things like deleting logs, SSH timeouts, and a few more. So the next tab over is going to be exports. So this is going to be where we either export to file copy. Really the only two options I use here are file copy or Jira Service Management Cloud. So the first thing we're going to select is file copy and select an export path. And then just make sure you test it out to make sure it works. And export path is available, perfect. So make sure you set that temporarily because we are going to need to export locally first before we export to the cloud. So I'll set that up and make sure it's file copy. I have a good directory where I know I'm going to be able to find my files, test it out, and make sure it looks good. Next thing is patterns. So patterns is essentially going to give you the more data that you can scan in from your local environments. So if you're scanning in data and you find some information missing, you could go through and check more of these options to check more information and pull in more information directly from your hosts. Generally speaking, I've not run into many cases where the out-of-box information wasn't enough. There's only one or two clients that I've worked with that we've actually gone through and configured some of the patterns. Otherwise, out-of-box settings here are probably going to be fine for you. Next, we have scan settings. So this is where we actually set up our IP ranges and define what we're scanning in. So I'll click on the plus button if you don't have anything set up yet, which if it's a brand new environment, this is the process that you'll take. You'll give it an ID or just leave the out-of-box ID. You'll set the scan interval to either daily or weekly. Daily is great if you want to bring things in and have a more consistent update. If you have no use case for updating daily, go ahead and just set it to weekly. That way you don't have the scan running as often. So we have a next scan date listed there, and then we could set our IP ranges or IP address. So for most of these, I'm just scanning in single IP addresses, but you can use IP ranges if you want to select your entire range of IP addresses within your network. You could enter that in here and then enter in a description. Once you have that, you should be good to go. You could also disable it inside of, or you could disable certain patterns within the specific scan if you'd like. So I'll remove that since I already have a few different scans. And as you can see, you could set multiple different scans up to have multiple different ranges, to have also multiple different credentials, which we'll go over next. So the next tab is credentials. When you set up credentials, you'll click same process plus button, and then you'll click on the scan settings that you want to apply this to. So that's why you primarily want to create different scan settings, so you could apply different credentials to different devices. So let's say that we want to apply this credential to our scan 3, and then we'll select the type, whether it's a Windows, an SSH, vSphere. Once we select that, we'll give our login and password. Once we have that information in, you'll click on test and make sure that you're testing with the correct IP address and make sure that your test is successful. If it is not successful, you will not be pulling any information in. So do be warned, this is one of the most critical spots that I've seen break. So make sure you're testing every single IP, not every single IP, but test a good chunk of your hosts and your IP addresses to make sure your credentials are actually working. Once your credentials are set up, you'll essentially be good to go. There's a couple of agent settings in here with some timeout and agent interval scanning settings. And then we could also set this up to install the service. I would recommend doing this after you run the first scan, just to make sure everything is set up correctly. And then you just install the service and this runs in the background, whether or not somebody's logged into this device. Last tab is update. So we'll run updates. Looks like I have an update ready for me. I won't run that yet, but you can update your discovery agent here. So once we have our settings set up, again, we're primarily going to be running into scan settings and credentials. Once we have those things ready to go, we could run our first official scan, which is going to be the file copy into a local directory. So I'll close this window out, and what we're going to do is run discovery.exe. That's it. So run that, click enter. So it'll start up and start running, and it's going to ask us to say enter to start. So I'll click on enter. And we have our scan running. So this may take a few minutes. After that's done running, it'll look a little something like this. So I had to go into my temp folder and we have now a zip file. So the zip file contains all the contents of our scan. And the next step is actually to upload this directly into our cloud environment. So I'll go into my asset schema. I'll create a new schema for this. If you already have an existing schema that you want to use, that's also fine. But in this case, I have nothing for a data center. So I'll create something blank, call this data center. And I will give this a good key, DC, create schema. And now the first step is to go to our schema settings and to the import tab. So we'll create an import and we're going to click on discovery. So this is going to be the other option that we have outside of CSV that we're going to be using. So discovery import, we'll give this a name, local network. You can name it whatever you want with a description. And then we're going to browse for that file that we exported locally. You could throw this over to your own local machine and then import this file that we have exported from our local directory. So we'll upload this, and it does have to be the zip file. Do not extract it. Exactly the way it exports, you're going to be uploading directly into the cloud environment. Now for this solution, we always want to have this checked, especially the first time that we are uploading this file. Do not uncheck this, and I will show you why later. What it creates for us is actually perfect and exactly what we want. I'll create my import, and we should have it show up in just a moment. This is a little bit beefier than the file that I was using previously. So it will take an extra minute to actually upload and start showing up for us. In the meantime, let me just close all this out. And let me refresh to see if it's showing up yet. Okay, there we go. We have our local network. We have it ready to run. And you can see all of our attribute mapping was done automatically. So I'll run this import. Again, should take just a moment here. I don't have too much data, but it will take longer than the local CSV that I had before. So there were some errors I could go through, find out what was going on. Some network interfaces had some issues. Other than that, looks like it ran well. Let's go back to our schema and see what we got. So as you can see here, it built a great schema tree with everything that we need within our environment to be able to bring in data and import it and run it automatically. So we have different statuses, we have operating systems, we have all these network interfaces. This is why we want to keep that option checked, because it's going to be creating all of these relationships and everything associated with this on our behalf. You probably don't want to go through and create this manually, and if you do create this manually, the next step is going to be a little bit harder. So go through, make sure all this information looks great, all of your information is actually coming over correctly. If everything looks good, the next step is to go back to our schema settings, back to import. Now you probably don't want to be running these imports manually, moving over your files, re-uploading these every single day. So the solution that we have is to actually run that import directly into our cloud environment. And the way we do that is by finding the import that we just used, we click on the three dots, and then we generate a new token. So this is going to bring up this token. We just copy this token over, and now we go back into our directory and make sure that we pull up CMD, and we're going to go back into our settings and configuration. So let me just pull up the correct directory really quick. Program files, Atlassian, discovery tools, and then cd space paste, and then discovery.exe-s. So we're going to bring up the settings one more time. It does ask for a password every single time that you open this, so make sure you don't lose that, otherwise you'll need to start from scratch. And now we'll go back to our export tab, and we'll change this from file copy to Jira Service Management Cloud. Now we're going to have an authentication token that we're going to paste in here. So I'll go back and make sure I copied over the correct token. I'll just regenerate it. If you do regenerate it, it will break, so keep that in mind. And then I'll go ahead and just paste that directly into our authentication token. I'll verify, cloud token is valid. Now we're good to go. So I'll close this panel out, and you can see that this last import ran. Let's see if we can get an exact time. Let's actually just go back to the schema, go to the host. So this ran at 6:35 p.m. So we could go back, and this will actually run every 24 hours if we set up the service. But if we want to run this manually, all we have to do is type in discovery.exe, and we run this, and it runs manually, and it goes straight into our cloud environment rather than giving us a local export. So this should take a couple of minutes to run, depending on how much information you're scanning in. If you're scanning in a very, very large network, it will obviously take longer. I've seen this run roughly an hour long with very large environments. So definitely keep that in mind. Once it starts to execute and actually brings in all of your patterns, all of your data, at the very last part of this upload or this process is going to be to upload that data into your cloud environment. So once you set this up, it's kind of like a set it and forget it. Just make sure you check your logs and everything, make sure everything is running correctly. But once you have your import running, so it's uploading the file, uploaded file successfully. Let's just give it just a moment to see if 6:35 changes to a newer time to make sure that this is going to be updated correctly and actually go straight to our Jira Cloud environment. Let me refresh and see if we have anything new. So 6:35 was the old time, still 6:35. Let's give it just one more minute here to see if it'll execute and upload our information. One other thing that I will mention here, let me just go into our schema settings. So with some of the settings that we have available to us, I could go into edit import structure, and then under the more options we have, nope, not in there. I think it was specific to these. So like, let's say host, let's pull up the object type mapping. So in this case, we do have these values created automatically for us depending on the object type that is being pulled in. But if we're missing an object, what it's going to be doing instead of ignoring, which is what the default option is, it's going to update that status and it's going to update it to not found. And the threshold number is the number of scans it takes for that to happen. So let's say your server goes down. It's going to go through one scan. And as soon as it sees that it can't find that server anymore, it's going to go through and edit the status attribute to not found. So very useful to be able to get your scans in daily, see exactly what's down, what's not down, what's found. Once it's not found, maybe you're decommissioning stuff, you could keep the status updated manually. But this is a great way to see what is and isn't being found within your scans. All right, I think our scan wrapped up, everything closed down. Let's see if our assets were updated. So 6:35 was the time to beat, and 6:39, there we go, modified 6:39. So we have our update. We could let this run daily, and from here on out, we're good to go. And as you can see here, we actually have a status of not found. I think the upload I made was actually older. So we have a status of not found for this device, and we have a new device created with some more information, which is also not found. But you can see that the upload actually updated information based on newer information that it collected on my local network. So very handy tool to use if you're using any kind of, or if you have any kind of data centers. We worked with a few clients to implement this. A very great tool to have and very great to implement, especially with your daily scans and then setting up your status and your not found objects to make sure that you're actually collecting and updating that information. You could also run automations based on this info. For example, if something's not found, you could open some kind of an incident or an alert and notify your team. So hopefully that helps you get started. It does go a lot more in depth and get a little bit more complex than this, but this is a great way to get started. So just start jumping in and utilizing this tool, and you could build this out as you go. If you want to get any kind of decent reporting out of Jira Assets, let's go over exactly how you can do that. Let's talk about the 3 different options that I recommend for reporting within your Assets environment. So the first option is going to be essentially to export your data, pull it out of your assets, and report on it externally. You could do this within Excel, or if you already have another reporting tool that you want to use, this is going to be the best method to do so. So I'd go into an asset schema, and I'd go into an object type. So I'll pull up laptops as an example. I'll go to bulk action, and then we'll click on export objects. So this will export all of our laptops, and I could set the formatting and hit export, and that pulls a list directly and downloads it for me to use wherever I'd like. So again, I could export this out to Excel, and this is what I do oftentimes to find things like duplicates, for example. So if I want to go through this list and find anything that might be a duplicate, I could export to Excel, use some conditional formatting, and find it that way fairly easily. A couple other ways you can report on this is to use some charts, some pie charts, bar charts. There's a lot of ways you can do that in Excel, but obviously if you have other data outside of or other reporting tools outside of Jira or outside of your reports and schemas and assets, you can use those by just exporting and re-importing into those tools. So that's option number 1. Let's go over the other 2. Let's go over the second option we have for reporting in our asset schemas. So when you're looking at your homepage and you see your list of schemas, on the top left, you'll have your reports tab. And this is kind of the out-of-box reporting for all of your assets and data within your asset schemas. So these are a bit slow, so just keep that in mind. But I'll go ahead and create my first report. And maybe I'm going to want to report on laptops. And then I'll select the template. I could list objects by attribute, by issue, that's Jira issue, objects over time, and attribute analysis. I'll keep things very simple and do objects by attribute just because I want to see maybe how many laptops we have, how many types of models that we have that are being currently in use. So I just want to go through and see some of that data visualized. So the very top section is going to narrow down our all of the attributes that we're going to be, or all of the objects that we're going to be showing and reporting on. So I could add as many or as little amount of filters as I'd like. So I'll pull in and do maybe just an object schema filter. So I'll add IT employee assets, and I don't want to report on anything else other than anything in this specific schema. Then I'll go through and select which attribute I want to report on. So I'll go through and find model, and I'm going to pull in my laptop models to see maybe how many laptops I have of each model. And now I have a bar chart, a visual representation of our MacBooks and our ThinkPads and how much I have of each. So in this case, I have 14, 12, and 6. And I could go through and change the report that I'm pulling in. So if I pull in laptops, maybe I want to pull in the owners and see how many individual owners have how many laptops. So there's 3, 3, 2, 1. And again, just gives us a really clean visual representation of the data that we have in assets. This is very simple. It's not overly complex or robust, but it does get you through whatever reporting you need in a pinch. So this is the visual section. And then down below, we have a list of that data if we want to select that as well. So we'll do the same thing, laptop owners. So I'll search for that in my list, laptop owners. And that'll bring us the list of data of the actual objects in our schemas. So that'll look something like this. And we could also add more fields. So right now we just have object key and owner, but we could pull in more data like model. We could pull in, maybe I want to see the name, the laptop name. So I'll pull in laptop name, and then maybe I want to see the serial number as well. laptop serial number. So I'll add all of these fields into the attributes, and now we should see them listed down here with a really clean and easy to see view of all of our data. So we have the object key, the name, the model, the owner, and the serial number. So I could go through and I could drill down into this data, and I could go into each individual object if I'd like. And as you can remember, we have our filters up top. So the more you filter this down and include specific object types, include specific object attributes, and even attribute values, that's what's going to be reported on in the visual section, and then in the detail section with your list views down below. So this is the reporting that I use to get through in a pinch and be able to find very specific information, or maybe total number of objects and assets within my schemas, and maybe be able to find some information that is going to help me make certain decisions. But again, it is very basic, and if we want something more advanced, we're going to have to go to option 3. So for the third option we have to report on our assets, we're going to be using a third-party plugin. I won't dive into the setup and configuration of these tools because you're probably already using one of these in your Jira environments. And there's quite a bit to go over since most of the reporting tools do include assets in some way, shape, or form. I will go through and recommend some of the apps that I've used personally and that I've had the best luck with. So the first one I'm going to recommend is the custom charts for Jira reports. And this one's really great to get started with because it'll do 99% of the reporting that you need with a very visual builder, very easy to use and get started way. So there might be that 1% of use cases or a couple of things that you can't do with this plugin. And if you're an absolute power user of Jira and assets, I would recommend using something like EasyBI. This is going to be your end-all be-all solution to pull in your data, report on it in any way that you'd like, not only from Jira and assets, but also from external data outside of Jira, and then report on that directly within your Jira dashboards, your filters, and all that good stuff. So custom charts and EasyBI are my two recommendations that I've personally used before. A couple of honorable mentions: reports, charts, and graphs for Jira dashboards. This one's really great for a free, they have a free version of this, and it's really great to get started with if you don't have or don't want to purchase a paid version to utilize reporting within the dashboard section of Jira. If you really want any kind of good or robust reporting, you're going to have to use a plugin, unfortunately, or you're going to have to use Atlassian Analytics, which are only included on the enterprise plan. If you do have analytics, I would recommend going with that first, trying it out, seeing if that's going to be a good solution for you. If analytics gets the job done, fantastic. That's what I would go with. If you don't have what you need with analytics, I would probably look into EasyBI at that point, or even just exporting your data externally and pulling it into something like Power BI or Tableau or something similar. That way you have all the reporting and capabilities that you need from your data, and then you're using Jira kind of as a source of truth and just pulling and syncing that data from Jira to your reporting tools. But again, those are the two apps that I would personally recommend to utilize if you are needing something a little bit more robust that's not out of box and that you can't do with just exporting. But keep in mind that both of these are paid options. Both of them are fantastic for not only assets reporting, but also reporting just natively within Jira. I know this looks like a lot, and if you'd rather just have me and my team help implement exactly what I'm showing you in this video, that is exactly what we do. We're currently opening up 4 more slots for our Jira strategy. We only run 4 of these per month. If you're interested, hit the first link in the description below.